You looked up at Jungkook, and he was still speaking, still explaining. Jungkook, I didn't know how to tell you, Jungkook murmured, almost defeated. I was too ashamed to tell you. I really wanted to help you, but the situation was so messed up. I made everything worse, and I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Yin, Jungkook, listen. The moment his name left your lips, he froze. His entire body went still, as if he were afraid of what you might say next. His lips parted slightly, his dark eyes filled with an uncertainty you had never seen before. Was he afraid? Afraid of your judgment? Afraid that you would think less of him? But you weren't thinking about that. No. Your mind was caught on something else, something bigger. Your grip on his phone tightened as your heart pounded. You inhaled sharply, before speaking again. Yin. Since when? He blinked. Jungkook. What? Yin. Exactly how many months have you been receiving these messages? Jungkook hesitated for a moment before sighing. His shoulders slumped slightly, as if he had been carrying a weight for too long. Jungkook. About 2 months. His gaze softened. He could see the shift in your expression, the concern. Your breath hitched. 2 months. For 2 whole months, he had been dealing with this alone. Your heart clenched. 2 months. He had been dealing with this for 2 whole months, alone, while you had been pushing him away, refusing to acknowledge him, treating him like he didn't exist. Regret settled deep in your chest, and you exhaled shakily, mustering the courage to tell him the truth. Your gaze dropped back to the phone, your fingers scrolling through the blocked contacts, through the disgusting messages, and suddenly, your blood turned ice cold. Your fingers trembled slightly as you turned the phone toward him, your voice steady despite the storm inside you. Yin. Jungkook, look at this. His brows furrowed as he leaned in slightly, confusion flickering in his dark eyes. Jungkook, yeah, I blocked all of these. I reported it too, but, Yin. No, Jungkook, you cut him off. Inhaling sharply, your heart pounded as you suddenly paused. You looked up at him, your voice quieter now. Yin. Jungkook, what do you think about Emily? The second you said her name, his expression shifted, his jaw clenched, his lips pressing into a thin line, his entire demeanor darkened, frustration flickering across his face. Jungkook, Yin, why do you keep bringing her up? His voice was laced with irritation. I don't like talking about her. I don't even. He paused, his brows furrowed deeper, as if something had just clicked in his mind. His expression hardened. Jungkook, I almost forgot. I went to your house. Your breath hitched, your entire body stiffened, and your fingers curled tightly around his phone. Yin, you went where? Your voice was dangerously quiet, laced with disbelief. Jungkook hesitated, suddenly unsure. He could see it, the way your entire demeanor changed, the way your eyes burned with something unreadable. Jungkook, I just wanted to return this to you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, holding it out toward you. Your ID card. Your heart pounded against your ribs as you snatched it from his hand, your voice sharp. Yin, where did you get this? Jungkook exhaled heavily, but he wasn't letting go of the real question he had been trying to ask. Jungkook, Yin, what was Emily doing in your house? Your stomach dropped, your grip on the phone tightened, anger bubbling inside you. Yin. Jungkook, you nearly yelled, glaring at him. Why the heck did you go to my house? Did you go inside? He flinched slightly at the intensity in your voice, but quickly shook his head. Jungkook, no, I didn't. I swear. I just. Yin, why are you avoiding the question? You inhaled sharply, trying to calm the storm inside you. Your mind was racing, spiraling in too many directions at once. You needed to focus. You exhaled slowly before speaking again. Yin, answer me first. Jungkook, your voice was firm now. What is Emily to you? His frustration deepened. He ran a hand through his hair, his dark eyes filled with confusion. His frustration deepened. He ran a hand through his hair, his dark eyes filled with confusion. Jungkook, why does it even matter? She's nothing to me. Yin, nothing. I don't even know her properly. I never did. Yin, it's Emily. His voice died in his throat. His entire body suddenly went still, his expression twisted in confusion. Jungkook, what? You pointed at the phone screen, your voice steady. Yin, Emily, it's her number. Jungkook, she's involved in this too. She's one of the people sending you these messages. He blinked, His lips parted slightly as his eyes darted between you and the screen, disbelief washing over his face. His stomach twisted with rage. If he had known this before, if he had even suspected it, she wouldn't have gotten this far. She had been sending him those disgusting messages. A wave of fury crashed over him, dark and unforgiving. His fingers tightened, his knuckles turning white. How dare she? How dare she cross this line? How dare she think she could get away with this? Jungkook clenched his jaw, his entire body rigid with unfiltered rage. He had been disgusted, uncomfortable, tormented by those messages for 2 whole months, without even realizing that it was her. Jungkook's eyes stayed locked on you as you hesitated. Your fingers trembled slightly as you gripped his phone. You swallowed hard before finally speaking, your voice quiet but firm. His eyes, dark and sharp, held an intensity that made your stomach twist. He had always looked at you like this, like he was trying to see right through you. Yin, she. Your voice barely came out. You swallowed, steadying yourself before forcing the words out. She's not in my house, Jungkook. His brows knitted together in confusion, but he said nothing. He just tilted his head slightly, waiting for you to continue. You took a shaky breath, your heart pounding so hard you could hear it in your ears. Yin, I'm in her house. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jungkook's lips parted slightly, his eyes flickering with realization, his muscles tensed as if bracing for something worse. Your throat felt dry. This was it. You had to say it. Yin, Jungkook, I'm not their real daughter. Your voice cracked, but you kept going. I'm adopted. I don't even know who my father is, and my mother. You swallowed hard, blinking away the stinging in your eyes. She's already gone. Jungkook inhaled sharply, his chest rising and falling unevenly. He looked at you like you had just knocked the wind out of him, like he didn't know what to do with the information you had just given him. Jungkook, so, they don't accept you. His voice was barely a whisper, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Yin, they do, you said quickly, almost too quickly, not wanting to show yourself weak. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Jungkook, really? He let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. Then why do you work like this? His voice was rough, filled with frustration. He pointed behind him, toward the dark streets, the same ones he had been following you through. He suddenly closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. It was like he was fighting himself, debating whether or not he should say the next words, but he did. Jungkook, they don't force you to work, right? His voice dropped lower, almost afraid of the answer. They don't hurt you, right? Your body immediately stiffened, your fingers curled around his phone, knuckles turning white. Your mind screamed at you to lie, to brush it off, to change the subject, but you couldn't. Jungkook's eyes were locked onto you, searching, waiting. You took a small step back. Yin, they don't. The hesitation in your voice was enough. Jungkook wasn't stupid. The way you avoided his gaze, the way your lips trembled, the way your body tensed, it told him everything. His breathing grew heavier. A slow rage started building inside him. Something dark and uncontrollable. Jungkook, Yin. He took a careful step forward, his voice soft but firm. Look at me. You refused. You couldn't. Jungkook clenched his jaw. He had suspected things weren't right, but this was worse than he thought. His heart clenched. He didn't know why, but the thought of you being hurt made something burn inside him. He exhaled, then stretched his arms open. Jungkook, come here. Your head snapped up, startled. Yin, I'm fine, you said quickly, forcing a small laugh. You don't have to act like this. Besides, I haven't even forgiven you yet. Jungkook's lips twitched slightly, but his eyes remained serious. Jungkook, just for a while. He took another step forward. You didn't move. He slowly reached out, gently pulling you toward him. When you didn't resist, he wrapped his arms around you completely, holding you close, and suddenly, the world disappeared. His warmth surrounded you, steady and firm. At first, your body was tense. Your mind screamed at you to push him away, but then, something inside you melted. You closed your eyes, inhaling slowly against his chest. This was dangerous. You knew that, but it felt good. You had imagined this moment so many times before, being held by him, feeling his warmth, his scent, and now that it was real, you didn't want to let go. Jungkook looked down at you, his brows furrowing slightly. He felt the way you adjusted your position, almost like you were trying to get more comfortable against him. Jungkook hesitated for a second before slowly raising a hand, placing his warm palm on the back of your head. His fingers splayed gently, cradling you, letting you move however you wanted. letting you take whatever comfort you needed from him. His touch was firm yet careful, as if he was afraid you'd pull away. But you didn't. Instead, you sank deeper into him, your fingers unconsciously gripping the fabric of his shirt. Jungkook let out a slow breath, his lips parting slightly before he murmured against the top of your head, his voice deep and steady. Jungkook, you're so strong. His thumb lightly brushed over your hair, his grip tightening just a little. I'm proud of you. His words hit you harder than you expected. No one had ever said that to you before. Your breath hitched, and for a brief moment, you allowed yourself to believe him, to believe that maybe, just maybe, you weren't as alone as you thought. Jungkook, feeling better? He murmured after a few minutes. You hummed softly against his chest, but then reality hit you. Your eyes snapped open as you thought to yourself, what the hell am I doing? You immediately pulled back, your hands flying to the back of your neck as you scratched awkwardly. You cleared your throat, trying to ignore the heat rushing to your face. Jungkook bit back a smirk as he watched you. You were actually blushing, but your expression was annoyed, hiding the flush on your cheeks. Wait, did you like him? No, that couldn't be. You had always acted like you hated him. Then why were you looking away, your whole face red? Jungkook huffed inside his mind. No way. You quickly turned your attention to his phone, still in your hand, desperate to hide your embarrassment. We need to report this. Your voice was firmer now, your brain forcing itself back to the real problem. And we need solid proof. Jungkook's smirk faded, his expression darkened again as he nodded. Then you looked up at him, a smirk slowly creeping onto your lips. What if we? Jungkook raised an eyebrow. Jungkook, what if we what? Your smirk widened slightly, a dangerous glint in your eyes as you explained your plan to him. It was the next day, and you were seated in your usual spot, chin resting lazily on the back of your hand as you listened to Jungkook. He sat right in the front seat below you, leaning back in his chair, a thick theory book in his hands. His voice was smooth, patient, as he read each line aloud, breaking it down, explaining it in a way that made it easier to remember. His sharp jawline was more prominent as he tilted his head back slightly, making sure you understood everything he was saying. You responded when he asked questions, nodding at the right moments. But despite his multiple attempts, and even some subtle begging, you refused to let him sit beside you. Jungkook sighed dramatically, flipping to the next page with a slight pout. But he didn't push any further. Instead, he focused on reading aloud again, trying to keep you engaged. Then suddenly, your gaze drifted. At first, it was innocent, just an absent-minded glance. But then your eyes settled on his ear, the curve of it, the smoothness of his skin, the silver piercing glinting under the dim lighting. Something about it drew you in. Before you could stop yourself, your fingers reached forward. The moment your fingertips made contact with the shell of his ear, Jungkook's voice faltered ever so slightly, but he didn't immediately react. His entire body tensed for a split second, yet he continued speaking as if nothing had happened. His eyes remained focused ahead, his expression unreadable. Encouraged by his lack of protest, you continued. Your fingers trailed down, playing lightly with the small earring, twisting it between your fingertips. The texture of the cool metal against your warm skin sent an odd sense of satisfaction through you. Jungkook, however, was losing focus fast. His hands gripped the edges of his book tighter, his eyes slowly becoming hooded as an unfamiliar feeling took over him. Your touch was gentle, feather-light, almost hypnotizing. A small part of him wanted to stop you, but a much larger part of him didn't. His breathing slowed, his heart pounded, and his words, once steady and confident, became slightly strained as he tried to push through the lesson. Then, suddenly, the door creaked open. You snapped your hand back immediately, as if you had been burned. Jungkook blinked, quickly regaining his composure as he turned toward the door. It was Emily. His gaze flickered back to you, his brow raising slightly in silent understanding. You rolled your eyes and exhaled through your nose. Time to put the plan in motion. Without hesitation, you leaned onto one arm, making yourself look as comfortable as possible. Jungkook, still slightly dazed from your earlier touch, didn't hesitate either. He reached back for your hand. Your fingers twitched as his own curled around them, his thumb absent-mindedly running over your knuckles in slow, deliberate motions. A jolt of warmth shot up your arm at the sensation. Jungkook wasn't just holding your hand, he was playing with it, almost studying it. His touch was light, almost as if he was testing the waters, seeing how much he could get away with. For a moment, you forgot you were supposed to be acting like couples. Your heartbeat quickened, but you forced yourself to stay neutral. though the feeling of his warmth against your skin made it much harder than you thought. Jungkook, on the other hand, was sinking into this moment far too easily. The way your hand fit in his, the softness of your skin, the way your fingers slightly curled against his own, it made something inside him stir. He looked back at you. His gaze dropped, briefly flickering toward your lips before he caught himself. You narrowed your eyes at him. Yin, don't get too hyped, you murmured, low enough that only he could hear. Jungkook's eyes widened slightly. Shit, he had been smiling. A slow unconscious smile that had crept onto his lips without him even realizing it. Panicking, he quickly straightened his expression, nodding stiffly like a soldier given an order. His face was only mere inches from yours, as your body was completely leaned forward and his was completely backwards, close enough that your breath was fanning against his skin. If either of you leaned in just a little, a sin could happen. Here, Emily clutched the straps of her backpack, her nails digging into the fabric as she stood frozen in place, her heart pounding. What the heck was she looking at? Her brows furrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line as her eyes darted between you and Jungkook. A few days back, Jungkook could barely stand you, and today, you were sitting together like lovers. She saw as Jungkook was leaning back in his chair, completely relaxed, his fingers casually playing with yours. And the worst part, you were letting him. Emily's teeth clenched, her chest tightened with frustration as she noticed the way some students glanced at you both, whispering among themselves. She hated it, hated the attention you two were getting, hated that he was sitting with you. Why you? Her fingers curled into a tight fist at her side, her knuckles turning white. No, she wouldn't say anything here. Not now, but she needed answers. She needed to talk to you. Emily, this girl, she muttered under her breath, her tone laced with irritation. You, on the other hand, had already noticed her reaction. Your eyes flickered toward her, taking in every little detail. The way her jaw twitched, the way her nostrils flared slightly as she took deep breaths, the subtle tremble in her hands. She was fuming, and it only made your smirk grow. To make matters worse, you leaned in slightly, closing the small space between you and Jungkook. Your movement was subtle, but you knew Emily was watching. You made sure she saw it all. Meanwhile, Jungkook was completely unaware of the silent battle. He was in his own world. His focus was entirely on you, or more specifically, your hand in his. His fingers brushed over your knuckles, slow and deliberate, as if testing the sensation. He couldn't place that why your hands felt different, small, warm, soft. His heart thumped loudly in his chest, his thoughts drifting as he absent-mindedly ran his fingertips along your wrist, and then, his mind slipped. What would it feel like to have these hands on him? A sudden heat rushed to his face at the thought, his fingers tightening around yours for a brief moment before he quickly shook the idea away. What the heck was wrong with him? Before he could make sense of it, you suddenly pulled your hand away. The warmth disappeared instantly, and Jungkook blinked, caught off guard by the loss of contact. His fingers twitched at the absence, a strange frustration bubbling in his chest. But then, the door creaked open. Both you and Jungkook turned toward the sound. It was the professor. All right, settle down, everyone. Jungkook straightened immediately, his shoulders tensing as he inhaled deeply, forcing his thoughts back to reality. He needed to focus, but as he glanced at you from the corner of his eye, he could still feel the lingering warmth of your touch on his skin, and for some reason, he wanted it back. The last bell had rung, and the lectures were done for the day. You exhaled softly as you stepped out of the classroom, the warm evening air brushing against your skin. Students were scattered across the hallway, some chatting in groups, others walking toward the gates. But your mind was elsewhere. Your thoughts swirled around what might happen next. Emily, she hadn't confronted you yet, but you knew it was coming. You weren't afraid of her. You never had been, because you had always chosen silence over unnecessary drama. Not because you were weak, but because peace was easier. But now you weren't sure if you cared anymore. You had no family to run back to, no safety net. The place you lived in was the only thing keeping you from having nowhere to go. But that fear of losing it didn't hold you down the way it used to. You could handle whatever came your way. Your fingers curled slightly as you walked, your eyes locked ahead, deep in thought, until something warm suddenly wrapped around your arm. You flinched slightly, your head snapping to the side, only to find Jungkook walking beside you, linking around your arm, holding onto you like it was the most natural thing in the world. His grip was secure but loose enough to seem casual. The corners of his lips curled up in amusement, as if he knew you'd react like this. Jungkook, Let's go to the cafeteria. Your brows shot up. Yin, are you my bestie? Jungkook simply grinned, shoving his hands into his pockets, clearly enjoying your reaction. But you weren't amused. Your gaze dropped to his arm, linked to yours. Before you looked back up at him, unimpressed, without hesitation, you yanked your arm away, putting some distance between you. Yin, Jungkook, we're just acting. Don't act like. Jungkook, oh, come on. It's not like you weren't touching me earlier. Your lips parted slightly, caught off guard. Yin, when did I? Jungkook simply shook his head, his smirk never fading. He didn't argue, didn't explain, just looked ahead, like he knew something you didn't. And then, his gaze shifted. You noticed the flicker of recognition in his eyes before you even turned to look. It was Emily, standing near the entrance, her arms crossed over her chest, her sharp gaze locked onto the two of you. You could feel the way she was dissecting every detail, every touch, every movement. Jungkook smirked. For once, he was thankful for her presence, because this gave him an excuse. And before you could process it, he leaned in and pressed a kiss to your cheek, making your entire body froze. Your breath hitched. Your heart slammed against your ribs, the warmth of his lips burning into your skin. Your eyes widened, and before you even thought about it, your hand shot out, slapping his chest. Yin, Jungkook, your voice came out in a whine, half shocked, half scolding, but he only laughed, a deep, rich laugh. Jungkook, relax, sweetheart. The nickname made something in your stomach flip, but you refused to acknowledge it. Jungkook, muttering under his breath. Emily, your eyes snapped toward the entrance again, and there she was, still watching you both, still seething, your lips too curled into a smirk. Yin, listen, I'm leaving now, but when she comes to me, don't forget to do the only job I gave you. Jungkook straightened slightly, nodding like an obedient child, and then he did it again, another kiss. This time, on your other cheek. Your brain completely short-circuited. Without thinking, you smacked his arm once, twice, 3 times. Jungkook burst into laughter, dodging your half-hearted attacks, but you didn't stay to argue. You turned on your heel and ran. His laughter echoed behind you, teasing and light-hearted. Jungkook to himself, what is wrong with me? He exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face, his smile lingering. And then his expression changed. His amusement faded into something more serious. His dark eyes followed your retreating figure, jaw tightening slightly. Once this mess is over, he thought, I'm taking you with me. No more distractions, no more pretending. He will make sure you are focusing totally on your studies, and maybe him. Pulling out his phone, Jungkook shoved his hands into his pockets and stepped outside the university. You walked casually, pretending like Emily didn't exist, not even acknowledging her presence. As you neared the entrance, you smirked to yourself, knowing full well she was staring at your back, her eyes burning with anger. As you were just about to pass by, her voice suddenly cut through the air, sharp and demanding. Emily, Yin, Emily called out, and you paused, your expression neutral. You turned around slowly, eyebrows raised as you faced her. Yin, why so sudden? You asked, feigning confusion, although you already knew what she wanted. Emily didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her tone was cold, and there was a sense of urgency in her voice as she replied, Emily, I just want to ask you something. Without waiting for your response, she started walking, expecting you to follow. You glanced back at Jungkook, who was still standing a little way behind, looking as calm as ever. When your eyes met, he gave you a thumbs up. You couldn't help but roll your eyes, but followed Emily nonetheless, stepping lightly as you trailed behind her. The quiet hallways of the university's backside gave way to a more secluded spot near the stairs, far enough from anyone who might overhear. There, Emily didn't waste any time. She didn't beat around the bush but immediately demanded, Emily, what's going on between you and Jungkook? Her voice was sharp, full of bitterness and frustration. You raised your eyebrows, unimpressed. Yin, none of your business though, you answered casually, a smirk tugging at the corners of your lips. But it was clear Emily didn't take well to your indifference. Her jaw clenched, and her hands balled into fists as her anger visibly flared. Emily, don't you think he's just pitying you because of your grades? She questioned. He's maybe just worried about your grades because you asked for his help first, she hissed, stepping closer to you, her voice filled with disdain. You didn't flinch. Instead, you leaned back slightly, still calm, allowing her words to hang in the air. Yin, yes, he is worried about my grades, you said with a nonchalant shrug. What boyfriend wouldn't worry about his girlfriend? You said it as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and it infuriated Emily. Her jaw hung open, and her eyes widened in disbelief. She took another step toward you, her rage bubbling over. Emily, how dare you say that? She snapped. But you stepped forward as well, closing the distance, just like you dared to show your place. You shot back, your words venomous and pointed. You shot back, your words venomous and pointed. Emily blinked in confusion, clearly not understanding the weight of your words. You could see her faltering, and it made you smile internally. You'd just struck a nerve. Stepping back slightly, you crossed your arms, your gaze cold and calculating. Yin, you know, my boyfriend mentioned something to me recently, you said casually, letting the tension build. Emily's eyes flickered with unease, but she remained silent, watching you closely. Yin, he's been getting some weird messages, absurd ones, you continued, watching the panic slowly creep into her features. From an unknown number. Emily's breath hitched, and her hands trembled, but she still remained silent, too afraid to speak. You leaned in slightly, lowering your voice just enough to make her feel trapped. Yin, I checked his phone, you added, and her face drained of color. Emily's eyes darted to the side, her mind racing as she tried to come up with an explanation. She didn't have one. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. You watched her squirm with quiet satisfaction. Then you dropped the bomb. Yin, well, do you know what the charges for cyberbullying are, Emily? You asked, your voice laced with a cruel amusement. The color drained from her face as she realized exactly where this conversation was headed. She grabbed your shoulders in a desperate move, shaking with fear. Emily, it wasn't me, she stammered, but you interrupted her, lifting a finger to her chest and pushing her back slightly. Yin, I never said it was you, you retorted, your voice low and chilling. The panic in her eyes was palpable now, and her entire body seemed to stiffen. Emily lowered her gaze, unable to meet your eyes. The silence stretched between you, and you could see the fear and guilt settle in. Emily, please Yin, no, please don't tell Jungkook, you're my sister, she pleaded, her voice cracking. The words were weak, desperate. You couldn't hide your disgust anymore. You rolled your eyes, shaking your head as you took a deep breath, as if the very thought of her was starting to suffocate you. Yin, oh, now I'm your sister, you asked, your voice dripping with sarcasm. She hesitated, her hands shaking, and finally admitted, Emily, I wasn't trying to do anything serious. I just wanted to mess with him, to see if he'd react. The words hung in the air. As pathetic as they sounded, you shook your head in disgust, unable to stomach her justification. But before you could speak, she reached out and grabbed your hand, her fingers tight around your wrist. Please, don't tell anyone, she begged. You jerked your arm away, not giving her a second glance. Yin, yeah, sure, you said flatly, a mocking edge in your voice. You didn't need to hear anything more from her. You turned and walked away without another word, leaving Emily standing there, pale and trembling. She knew it was over. She had admitted everything. As you walked away, you couldn't help but smile to yourself. Jungkook would have already recorded it all. The hate in Emily's eyes as she stared at your retreating figure was almost palpable. She had plotted your downfall, but now it was her who was facing the consequences of her own actions, her own jealousy, her own petty schemes. It had all backfired. You stormed through the university hallway, each step heavy with the anger that still simmered within you. The conversation with Emily had left you fuming, her words still echoing in your mind. How could she think she could get away with all that? You were ready to confront it head on. But as you walked, you noticed someone lingering behind you, Jungkook. He had slipped quietly from his hiding spot, and now, with a mischievous grin plastered on his face, he moved in close, his hand snaked around your shoulder, and he held his phone out towards you. You froze suddenly, feeling his presence far too close, his warm breath against your ear as he whispered, Jungkook, hey girlfriend. The teasing, playful tone in his voice made your pulse quicken, and you instinctively pulled away, snatching the phone from his hand with more force than necessary. Your voice was sharp as you muttered, Yin, that girl is so disgusting. How dare she think she can do that? You couldn't hold the frustration back, your chest tightening as you spoke. Let's go to the principal right now. Jungkook, I'm not letting her get away with it. Jungkook didn't flinch at your outburst. Instead, he chuckled softly and reached for your hand, his grip firm but reassuring. Jungkook, calm down Yin, he said in a low, soothing tone, as if trying to steady you. You looked at him, puzzled by the sudden shift in his behavior. He was different, more present, more focused on you. You raised an eyebrow, your voice skeptical. Yin, you can't be serious right now, can you? Jungkook sighed dramatically, as if resigned to something he couldn't change. He leaned in closer, his face lighting up with a sudden thought, and your heart skipped a beat when he spoke. Jungkook, I guess I don't really have a choice, do I? He smiled at you, his eyes gleaming with intent. But seriously, Yin, after everything that's happened, I want you to come to my house, spend some time there. You know, just studying, not even working. You get me, you groaned, rubbing your forehead in frustration. Jungkook, I can't just leave my work like this, it's not that simple. You were genuinely torn. There was so much you still needed to do, so much responsibility weighing on you. But at the same time, Jungkook's offer was almost too tempting. He closed his eyes, his expression one of genuine concern. When he looked at you again, his eyes were filled with an intensity you hadn't seen before. Jungkook, but it looks so hectic, Yin. I don't want you pushing yourself to the brink like this. It's not healthy. His words softened something inside you. You hadn't expected him to care this much. You felt the heat of your own heart flutter as you looked at him, and for the first time, in a while, you realized that maybe, just maybe, you needed this break. You smiled a little, the softness of the moment making you feel vulnerable. Yin, it's okay. I don't mind working because I have to. Well, so your house, huh? You'll teach me? You asked, your voice quieter now, trying to change the topic. Without a second thought, Jungkook nodded. There was no hesitation in his movement, no doubt in his eyes. He leaned in even closer, and you could feel the warmth of his breath against your skin. Jungkook, I'll help you. You can trust me, Yin. I won't disappoint you. His words were like a promise, something you didn't expect to hear from him, but somehow felt genuine. Your heart raced, and despite yourself, you couldn't resist. You bit your lip and looked at him, your face unreadable as you finally said, Yin, okay, I'll think about it. You turned and started walking ahead, your pace quickening. Jungkook didn't fall behind though. He walked right beside you, his steps in sync with yours, but his voice called out to you again. Jungkook, Yin, please, Yin. I said I'll think about it, you replied, teasing him with a smile that you knew drove him wild. There was a part of you that enjoyed the way he whined, the way his heart seemed to slip into your hands with every word. By the time the two of you had made it to the principal's office, you had already handed over all the proof you had, screenshots of the messages, evidence of Emily's behavior, and the principal had already called her parents. You were exhausted, but more than that, you just wanted to leave. The tension in the air was too much, and you didn't want to be part of the drama anymore. You started to head out, Jungkook walking closely behind you, his hand subtly brushing against yours, a silent request to hold it. But you didn't pull away this time. You both stepped out into the hallway, and Jungkook looked at you with an earnest expression. Jungkook, Yin, my home. You scratched your forehead, still processing everything that had happened. You were done with all the chaos, but Jungkook's offer seemed like a good way to clear your mind. Yin, fine, let's go, you said, unable to resist the warmth he radiated. Jungkook's face lit up at your agreement. He kicked the air in excitement, and you couldn't help but feel a flush creep up your neck. He was so carefree in that moment, so alive, and it made you feel things you hadn't quite expected. You walked faster, trying to hide your embarrassment, but Jungkook was right behind you, making sure you knew he was there every step of the way. And just like that, you both exited the building, heading to his house. The tension in the room was suffocating, thick enough to make it hard to breathe. Emily's parents sat across from the principal, their heads bent low in silent shame. Your mother, trying to maintain some composure despite her overwhelming guilt, spoke with a quiver in her voice. We're really sorry, sir. Please, I beg you, don't let this case leave the university. We can fix this, just don't let it spread outside these walls. Her words were filled with desperation, a woman torn between protecting her daughter and facing the reality of the mess Emily had caused. But before anything could be addressed, a loud thud broke the fragile silence. Emily, who had been standing by the door, suddenly lashed out. Emily, no, Mom, Dad, I haven't done anything. It's all a setup. Her voice trembled with a mix of panic and anger as she tried to defend herself. But the words only served to ignite the growing fire of frustration in her mother. Before Emily could say another word, her mother stood abruptly, face twisted with rage. Without warning, she slapped Emily across the face with such force that it echoed through the room. The resounding sound of the slap seemed to freeze time for a brief moment. Emily stood there, shocked, her face stinging from the blow. "Shut up," her mother yelled, her voice raw and full of fury. "Just shut up. It's all because of you. You think you can get away with this? Don't you have a single ounce of shame left in you? Is this why we sacrificed everything to put you through school? So you could bring disgrace to this family? Shame on you, Emily. Shame on you." Emily staggered back, her eyes wide with shock, the sting of her mother's slap still fresh on her cheek. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words got stuck in her throat. Her mother's anger was too much to bear, and it was clear that there was no escaping the weight of her actions. Her mother didn't even wait for Emily to respond. She turned sharply on her heel, her face flushed with anger, and walked straight towards the principal, her movements stiff with frustration. "I'm sorry, sir, but please." The principal, who had watched the entire exchange, cleared his throat, his voice grave as he addressed the situation. "I understand this is a difficult moment for all of you," he said, his tone firm. "However, the matter has already been reported, and the decision is final. For now, Emily is suspended from the university." His words seemed to strike Emily like a physical blow. The world around her seemed to blur as the full weight of what had just happened crashed down on her. The moment she had tried so desperately to avoid, the moment she had feared, had arrived. She was suspended. Her academic career, her reputation, everything she had worked for, shattered in an instant, and she had no one to blame but herself. Emily's mother, standing behind the principal, didn't say another word. She didn't look back at Emily, her expression cold and unwavering. She simply turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps heavy with finality.